All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, folks beyond the binary. You're tuned into the Spotlight series. I'm Zack Ritter. I'm an Associate Dean of Students at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and I do the Sunday show. And Joe Brooks, who runs Community Works Institute, does the Friday shows. Thank you for tuning in. CommunityWorksInstitute.org is where you need to go to check out professional development activities and institutes that will be coming up shortly for K through 16 educators to learn about equity and justice issues, about new curricular issues, about bridging that divide between administrators and teachers, and so much more. So please go check out CommunityWorksInstitute.org. They bring the classroom to the community and the community to the classroom, and just always cooking up new, interesting professional development opportunities for K through 16 and even K through 20 educators. So I'm really excited. I just got to see this individual a couple weeks ago. Nedjra Manning is here. How are you?
I'm great. I'm on summer break, so.
Even better. Nedjra is the real deal because she's an actual teacher. You know, so we have folks that come on and philosophize about education, and I feel like I'm an imposter sometimes because I'm in the college classroom and the college administrative halls, but Nedjra is a teacher in New York and in Harlem. So tell us a little bit about your journey becoming a teacher. Like, did you always know that you wanted to become a teacher?
No, I did not always know I wanted to be a teacher. I live in Harlem, but I teach in the Bronx, and I've only taught in the Bronx. I'm from the Bronx. So yeah, I feel like after college, I knew that I didn't really want to do what most people were doing. And I ended up, like, after doing like an administrative job at a dermatologist office, like I saw this summer reading program, and I taught over the summer for like all age groups. And it was like a very scripted thing. Like they actually gave you like a book for like the students that were going to be entering like second and third grade, and another one for the ones that were entering fourth and fifth, and then another one for like the high schoolers. And there was an adult speed reading class. And so I did that for a summer throughout the tri-state area. You like literally had to like drive to different places and like do this out of a church basement or at Fordham University or whatever. So I did that for a summer, and the program was like fine. Like I didn't love that it was like scripted, but I think it was a really good, like, okay, like this is a little weird, but the teaching part is kind of cute. So then after that, I did the New York City teaching residency, and I've been teaching this is my 9th year, including the residency.
Wow. Just out of curiosity, what were the other people doing that you were like, ooh, I don't really want to do that?
Well, a lot of people wanted to stay in DC, and I knew I didn't want to do that. And a bunch of people were like, had been either like getting a lot of people throughout college like had internships and stuff. I felt like there was like a mad dash for internships. And I was like, I don't really want to work for free. Not that, obviously some internships are paid, but I was just like, that's not the vibe right now. And then a bunch of people were getting like consulting jobs, like working for Deloitte, or that's the only one I can remember, but it was like, it's a big deal, like that kind of stuff.
Got you. So you have a unique like childhood from what I've gathered. So you kind of grew up in the Bronx in like was it a co-op? And it was
I grew up in Co-op City.
Okay. Tell us about that, because I feel like that may have influenced your teaching style.
Yeah, so I grew up in New York, but kind of like half and half. So until I was 13, we lived in Co-op City. And then 13, somewhere around there. Then my family moved to Mount Vernon, New York, which is like the bottom of Westchester County, which is like right on the border of the North Bronx. So it was really close to where we used to live, maybe like a 10-ish minute drive. But it was a very like, this is like an upward mobility move, whatever. And both of my parents are Antiguan. So I grew up in a very like Caribbean household. And the thing I always tell people that what probably really influenced my perspective on education, at least like for a long time when I was like getting into teaching, I was thinking about my own educational experiences. And I remember like, I think for the residency I'd written my application, I talked about like the different schools that I had gone to. And I had started off, I went to like a Black nationalist Muslim school in the Bronx. And then we went to a parochial Catholic school from like I did from second to fifth grade. And then my older sister had campaigned really hard. She was like, my parents were not trying to send us to public schools because they had heard really bad things about them. And kind of like just through the network was like, you can't send them to these bad public schools. So then after a while, my older sister had campaigned super hard. She was like, we're not getting a normal experience. Like we need to go to public school. And so yeah, she and I both went to like the public school in Co-op City. And I went there only for sixth and seventh grade. And then my parents had, I think also through a network, found out about this program called A Better Chance, which is really similar to Prep for Prep. And it's basically like you take like Black and brown kids out of like underprivileged situations and send them to prep schools or like kind of help them, you know, have more of a success. I mean, a lot of air quotes. I did that program and I went to Convent of the Sacred Heart in Greenwich from 8th grade to 12th grade.
So your partner is one of my best friends in the world, and me, you, and him have very interesting conversations about how the world is and how the world could be, like Lorraine Hansberry talks about, like teach what is and teach what could be. So you, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of have this like somewhat of a hippie yet radical twist on how you teach history. I'm going to come back to the Antiguan roots and some of the things you just mentioned, but how do you approach teaching history in your classroom?
Well, it's changed a lot over time. You know, I think I've always thought of myself as a pretty like, I always wanted to teach what was like not the traditional like, you know, textbook version of whatever history is. And it's so funny because I think, you know, when people find out you're a teacher, I feel like one of the most frequent reactions that I have is like, do you teach the real truth? I'm like, no, I'm like, no. I just think it's so funny that that's like the question that people ask, because I think that, you know, for a lot of people, they're like, can you actually like teach what you believe is true? Or like, do you feel like you're like constrained by, you know, the standards and the man and stuff? But I've always felt pretty free technically about what I could teach. Right? I think like reflecting now, there are some like pressures or some just like unforeseen like expectations that you don't like, you might not even be sure where they come from about teaching. So I feel like the longer that I've taught, the closer I've gotten to like actually teaching what could be, like Hansberry said, right? Like when I started off teaching, I was teaching mostly middle school and US history. And for the past 3 years, I've been teaching 10th grade global. And in the past year, we like radically just like restructured our curriculum So now we're teaching a course that was like about power and oppression. And I think that I've just realized how much I can just like continue to learn and teach in a way that's like, even for probably when I began teaching, so much more like expansive than what I thought, at that time.
Hmm. Okay, so just to give people context, so you're teaching in a public school in the Bronx, and what's so these are these like working class families, like Dominican American kids, like who, like what kind of students are we talking about, and what kind of other teachers and administrators are we talking about?
Yeah, I teach in a school, a public school that goes from 6th to 12th grade in the South Bronx. Um, there's a lot of immigrant families, Dominican, Mexican, West African, all throughout, like little bit of a mix throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, a bunch of Black students. And that's mostly it as far as students. People always say that we teach in the poorest congressional district, which I honestly don't know if that's true or not. I feel like it can't be true, but I don't know. And then as far as teachers, my school is technically a public school, but it does have some charter tendencies. And I mean, I guess like many charters and many public schools, there are a bunch of teachers from like TFA, not as many as there were before. There are a bunch of teachers who did like an alternate like certification route like I did. So like the New York City Teaching Residency, which is now the Teaching Collaborative. But there's a mix in terms of like backgrounds or like where the teachers are even from. I do think that it's cool. There are a bunch of teachers that are like from the Bronx, from New York, which I think is really cool. And increasingly now, because we're like getting close to, I think the school is like 16 or 17 years old. There are now some teachers and staff members who are former students. So that's pretty cool to see.
That is really cool. That's really cool. Me and my best friend nerd out about James Lowen, who wrote Lies, my history teacher taught me, and other folks like that who are talking about how our curriculum is very Eurocentric and leaves out a lot, leaves out working class white folks, leaves out Black and brown folks, leaves out women, queer histories, disabled histories, so much. You teach a class called like Blackity Black history, right? And so you're trying to like recenter Black folks in history. Tell us about that.
So this thing has gone through many different phases. It's been a class, it started as a club. So the school where I'm currently teaching, this is my 5th year there. And when I started, I was teaching mostly middle school, but I had one 12th grade section that I was teaching like an African diasporic literature class to. So I just made that class up and it was like my baby. And that class was dope. I'm not gonna hold you, like that was a really cool class. And so at the time, towards the end of the year, like usually my vibe is like, I don't try to take on too much when I start at a new place, like just like to get a sense of it. And my school has so much programming like outside of just the school day curriculum and like school day classes. So there's a lot of opportunities to do stuff after school. And there are people who are reaching out like, what do you want to do? You can do a club, you can do a class, you can do X, Y, Z. And I was like, let's just take it one step at a time. But towards the end of my first year, I decided I wanted to do this club. And it was with a few 12th graders, anyone who was old enough, because I wanted to be able to show like stuff that I would watch on my own.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I created that club and it was really cool. We would watch like, it's Black media studies. And so we'd watch movies mostly and then just talk about it. And I think I watched Moonlight like 4 times that year or maybe 10 times since it's come out. And honestly, it's great every time. But yeah, so it started as a club, and then after that first year, it was too much on my plate to be teaching 3 different grade levels. So I ended up moving exclusively to middle school. And so the the club had a little bit of a hiatus. But when I moved back to teaching high school, and this has kind of been like I'm settled with 10th grade, I started teaching Blackity as a class, as a ninth period class, like almost like an elective where students could, kind of front load credits. And I ended up teaching some of the students that I had taught when they were in 7th and 8th grade. And at that point, they were ninth graders. And that's like my Blackity gang. Like I've taught some of them almost like 5 years in a row. So I taught them then, and they really I think they made it they took it to another level because they're just super invested. We watched all types of things. We talked about stuff. We went on trips, and they would just tell me what they wanted to do. And so it was kind of really fun. And I really don't believe in that saying if you love what you'll do, you'll never work a day in your life. But I feel like that's the closest I've come to I want to do this so much, and it was so much fun. And then the following year, the administration told me I had to teach that. If I wanted to teach that class, it had to be to the new ninth graders, and I was like, okay. So I did it, and it wasn't the same. And so for the second semester, my Blackity girls came back, and then last year with the pandemic, I didn't do it. And I had one student come up to me multiple times. They're also some of my favorite students. She was like, "Miss, what are you doing? We could be having Blackity right now." She was like, "Send the link. What are you doing?" She consistently reminded me just do it. And I was like, yeah, it's just, there's a lot going on.
So you didn't get pushback from administrators about the content of the class or anything like that? No.
I don't think I've ever really gotten any pushback about content like that. I think it's been, especially I don't teach any class that there's a test associated with it. Nobody is really checking for you're not teaching whatever we expect. I've never had that experience. So I don't know. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I've never had anyone be like, you need to teach about ancient Rome. There are some times when people are like, you're teaching this, how does it relate to these, the scope of the class? Are you sure it has something to do with what standards is it related to? But I feel most of the time you can make it work.
Right, exactly. No, I agree. I agree. That's how I teach my class. When you teach certain content that's whatever, when you're just teaching history and it's connecting maybe with some of the lived experiences or identities of the students that you have in your class, do you see your students really vibe with the material and connect with it differently when it's just George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and talk us through what does that look like when light bulbs go off for these students, or they're oh, I see myself, or oh, I could be some figure or be in history or blah 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 blah.
Yeah, I will say I think students at my school have had that experience, and fortunately they come to expect it. So I think that students are more likely to say when something doesn't feel it's not as much as it doesn't relate to them, but they'll just be they'll let you know if they find something boring. They will definitely let you know. And this year, especially after we changed our curriculum, I mean, it was a little funky because so many of the students weren't really in person. I feel like you can't really get as much of a sense, but the students who are super vocal, there were definitely some students that were like, we're learning about really important stuff. Like, this is stuff that I've never really talked about in X, Y, or Z way. That's always really cool to hear. But it is weird, like I said, because I feel like it's like a DJ when you're virtually DJing and you're like, are they dancing? Like, I really don't. I know for some students it worked, and then for so many others, there were so many other, higher priority things going on. But I think that it feels really good for me. It feels really important for me. And like, you do get the feedback some ways, but I think that what's hard sometimes is when you're like, this is so important. Students are going to be so jazzed. Like, we're talking about like Indigenous history, like they are going to be like all over it. And like, if they're not, you're like, damn.
Well, why sometimes do you think it works with some students and sometimes stuff that you thought was going to be really hard hitting, it misses the student?
I think, like you, and Peter, like, y'all are such like history heads, right? So there's like so much that is so exciting to you. And like, I'm a history head in a different way, but I think that sometimes something that is so interesting to you, you find it so important. You're like, it's an underrepresented history. Like, people are gonna like it's gonna be off the charts. And then you're like, they just like, maybe right now it's not hitting for them in that way, like, and it's not it right now. And when you're teaching 100 kids, like, nothing is ever going to be like hitting like that for everyone. So sometimes it feels like a little bit of a letdown, but it's also like, you literally can't win everybody. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Peter taught me this thing a couple of weeks ago that no one went to jail from the Civil War. It was just like Jefferson Davis was in prison for 2 years. And I was just like, that like got me. I was like, there's no, like, where's the justice? Like, we're always like papering over our history. It's just like, yeah, all these hundreds of thousands of Americans were killed and no one goes to jail. No, there's no penalties. Like, all these like, Black folks enslaved, like, okay, everything's fine. Like, there's reparations to white slave owners for like $300 for everybody you own, for each person you own. And it's just like, where's the justice? And so when I talk with Peter and when I talk with you and these history facts like come out, it makes me depressed, then it makes me angry, and then it makes me want to like teach. It's like in that order. So I can only, and I'm 35, so I can only imagine if I was like, I don't know, whatever, like 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and I'm learning this stuff, I'm like outraged. It's like, what is this world that I'm coming into? This is sickening, and what is anybody doing about it? And, ironically, Ocasio-Cortez represents the Bronx or South Bronx, right? And so, and she's trying to speak truths, and people are like, oh, she's terrible, and oh my God, she's speaking too much truth, and da da da. So, and then I want to hear about your educational background. But in the classroom, do students talk about history, but also talk about current events of like Trump or Biden? Do they have these conversations across time?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one thing I've felt like strongly about since the beginning, like always like weaving in current events, and like students bring in stuff happening all the time. A lot of times I feel like I've learned things, like students are like, Miss, did you hear that XYZ happened? I'm like, oh no, like, so a lot of times the current connections are the things that I find super exciting. Like, I'm not as much like y'all are like into like all these like dates or facts or like that's not my thing. Like, I know some, but I'm not as not as out here like supplying facts. But I do think I personally feel like really stimulated by connections. And I feel like really strong about my questioning and my connecting. So yeah, students always are making current connections. One of the things we did this year was like we did 2 research projects, so students could like have an overall theme to work from, and then they could either choose something historical or current under that theme to research. And so there's a lot of current connections going on.
So this is interesting. Peter and I are real history heads, like you say, and we're like, you know this date, and you know this, like Muhammad Ali did it.
Literally.
And like in this movie and like in this Nas lyric, he's talking about Attica, right? And we were just like connecting all these things, and we approach history through almost like a Jeopardy type, like connecting the dots of oppression or something like that.
A new game show.
Really sad, very sad. And you approach it in a different way, and I think your way might work better in the real world because you're actually a high school teacher, and we're just kind of like fanboys on the side. So like, tell us about, you just started talking about your like the process and like creating these assignments. What is your process in, or I don't know, like what is your process and what do you think it takes to be a good teacher?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think there are lots of different avenues to being a great teacher. I think like, especially depending on the level, so much of it is like realizing what your personality is and how that complements like some of the really important parts about teaching. And then like, you know, kind of like being upfront with people about that, especially because there's so much collaboration that happens in teaching. A lot of us have co-teachers, and it's like, you don't have to, I feel like sometimes people, there's so much personality involved. Sometimes you might feel like you need to be this teacher or be one type of teacher, but I think it's more important to like know what actually works for you and just like, you know, realize that for yourself so that you can share it with other people. As far as my process, I don't know. I feel like at this point, have been teaching long enough that I have like a little bit of a toolkit built up. And I have certain like strategies and things that I've learned in the past or taught in the past that I'm like, are good foundations for me. But at this point, like I said, we like changed our curriculum. And so I did I feel like I'm like a big, like I have big dreams, big ideas. Like it can be harder for me to get down to the specifics, but I'm like, I want someone to like be able to like see this piece of artwork and make a connection to like the 3/5 compromise. Like I feel like I see something and I like can get inspired by it, and I want to like expose kids to that. And so like a lot of the times I'm like trying to figure out how to take the big ideas or like dreams I have and like create like lesson plans that make them realities. And I've gotten a lot better, especially at my school. Like the co-teacher relationships are really much more emphasized than they have been at my last school. And so like talking to people through that, I realized like I need time. Like I don't like that I might always be in a meeting with someone else. Like I really value the time to think for myself and to work through some ideas for myself. Like I don't want to be talking to somebody else for 45 minutes about an idea. I need like time to think it through and get some things straight for myself, and then like talk with someone else if it feels right, and then like, you know, get down to like putting things together. But at this point, I feel like I'm really trying to like just like take as many ideas from students as possible. Like I feel like one thing I'm really trying to work on is like really like we've communicated to students a lot. Like we need your feedback. Like that's what's going to make it better. And I don't know if they always believe that. So I'm constantly trying to think of ways to like actually make it feel like students are building a class, like we're doing it like together. And I feel like some of the ways that classrooms traditionally work make it difficult to do that. Because it's like, we want to build it together, but I have this curriculum set before you came into the classroom.
Mhm. So,
So yeah,
so
so I'm constantly thinking about that. And now at this point, I'm also like, I'm trying to like abolish everything. I'm like telling everyone like, also like, can we not do things these ways anymore? So I feel like that's a big part of the role that I'm stepping into.
w- so that's a big topic, right? Education abolition and doing away with standardized testing and doing away with like stop yelling at your students and stop like causing like
Yeah.
abuse in the classroom. And you were telling me about how you really try to get to know your students, and if someone has a bad day or someone is like, if you realize that you maybe said something that rubbed someone the wrong way, you like apologize to the student, you try to treat them as like equals. So tell us a little bit about like education abolition, or even just these things that you're seeing that are low-key toxic and you're like, can we not do that anymore?
Yeah, I think, well, in the past year, I started before the racial reckoning. But I feel like around that time and before then, there was like more of a conversation, at least that I was exposed to, about prison abolition. So I started learning about that, and I'm still learning about that. And I started like seeing people also make the connection to like abolition and education and how those are like part of a like related ecosystem. And so last, yeah, so I just started learning more about that. I was in a book club, um, and at my school, as many schools have been doing since the racial reckoning, there's been like more conversations about like race and racism in education. And so I've been part of that. I joined like the founding equity team at my school. And I mean, teaching in itself is already so humbling, but it is really humbling to like think about the things that you've done throughout your career, and like why you did that, and the things that have like, not really been helpful or that you're not proud of. And so I feel like a lot of these conversations have been happening for everyone to like kind of reassess like a lot of our philosophies around education and like why we do the things that we do, which is, I think, really necessary. And so a lot of it is tied to standardized testing. My school is what's it called? A PBAT school. So we don't have to, like, students don't have to take all of the regions, even though they do have to take some. Um, and so it's already a little bit off the like beaten path. But I do think like this past year, especially because of the pandemic, I feel like the thing that I've been feeling the most is like, if we don't like take this as a moment to like learn something from, like, it's gonna be even shittier than like than it already is. So I think the big thing that I'm really wrestling with now, and like even going into this past school year, I was like wondering about grades and like thinking about like what's the purpose of them, and I'm still like very unsettled with
Mm.
them. We still like rated students last year, but or the school year that just ended, but it does sometimes feel like a big farce.
Hmm. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, so I don't really know how to like move forward with it. It is something that we talk about at school. I feel like more like me and some of the co-workers that I'm close with, either on like my grade team or part of like the history department. Um, but it's like happening still. And I don't really know what I would like to see ideally.
Why does it feel like a farce?
It just feels like there are so many students that are like doing things because they know they're going to get a grade about it, and that it almost feels like it's an obstacle to learning.
Mm-hmm.
um, Sometimes like that was already happening beforehand, like students are like, miss, what can I do, like like they have kind of like formulas that they've set up to, you know, get the grades that they want. So that was already like in place. And I feel like it's like so tied to like compliance. I feel, you know, over the years, there are ways to get, you know, more, it's kind of like creating assessments that you feel like give you an accurate picture of what students have really like grasped about a concept, or like, you know, what they can demonstrate with a skill. But I don't really feel like it is, I don't really feel like, I feel like there could be so many other things that get in the way that don't feel fair in giving a student a grade. And then with the pandemic, like, it just feels so crappy to have a student that, you know, like might be going through so many things that you don't even know about, and have them be stressed about grades. I feel like that feels really, really bad. And it feels weird because if you know what's going on with the student, you know, like maybe some people are going to be more comfortable with, you know, excusing work or whatever, but it's like, I shouldn't have to know that you're going through like horrible things. Like you shouldn't feel beholden to tell me that so that you could get excused from an assignment. Like, I think the amount of stress that was added by grades really doesn't serve people.
And when you tell administrators, do they respond well to this?
Say it again.
When you talk about this with administrators, do they respond well?
Well, I haven't talked about it with administrators that much. I feel like I've been talking about it more with coworkers, like other teachers and stuff. But I don't imagine that they would respond super well. It feels like my school is really focused on like data, big data.
Big data. Yeah, yeah. The disconnect oftentimes with big data and what's going on in the classroom, which is unfortunate. Okay, wait. I want to press pause. Let's rewind the tape and go to your education.
Nice.
And let's, I love this. Tell us about your education. Like you were at what, like George Washington, you were doing like anthropology, like even at the co-op, like Co-op City, like what was your K through 12 and then college experience like?
Thank you for asking. Sorry, I felt like I was still like stuck in a silly zone and I wanted to do something that I forgot. And then I was like, wait, you have to like, okay, I'm back. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I went to a few different schools. And the thing I forgot to say is that like, I think that one of the reasons that I really was propelled to be an educator is because I saw some of like the really different experiences that you could have based on like going to a school, like going to like schools within a very, I mean, technically like not super far away. Like it's not like we were moving states or, you know, whatever. But I had different experiences in those schools. So like that first school that I went to was like very Black. And I was really little, so I don't know like how that, like what I really retained from it. But I just love that that was like my first real like outside of the home, like educational experience, you know? Like there would be like Kwanzaa performances and my cousin went there too. So I think that's why we ended up going there. And I had a teacher that I really loved there. And I felt like I always like had experiences where people were like, you're a good student, like, you know, saw something in me. And I definitely like that feeling. I was like, oh, what, me? And then we went to, so almost all of my schooling was in the Bronx up until 8th grade. And so I went to parochial Catholic school. And then I went to public school, like in my neighborhood.
Mm.
And all of those, even though the first two schools were like, I guess, private in a way, I feel like they were more like, I don't know what the word is, like urban. Yeah, I don't know. I was like, I don't want to say hood schools, but like they were, because they were, I mean, I don't know. They were, yeah.
But you know, urban can be good. I mean, were they
It
good
just
experience?
sounds like something like a category from the Grammys. Anyway, so yeah, I went to these urban schools, and I I don't know. I honestly sometimes when I think about, especially when I started teaching, I was like trying to remember what it felt like to be the ages and at the grade levels that my students are. But I don't really remember it that much. Like I feel like I always was seen like as a good student. Like I was really like, I think I was like competitive with myself, you know?
Mm.
Um, and then when I switched, like the big jump was from going to these more urban schools, and then in eighth grade I started going to Sacred Heart, and so like it's in Greenwich. It's like a former boarding school. It's like mostly white. It's like super wealthy. It's an all-girls school, like a independent Catholic school. It's like, you know, very, very, very like everyone goes to college. Like it's super competitive.
Mm.
But the school also like had a culture, like a spirit that they really emphasize. And I think partially just getting lucky and partially like just the people that were in my class. Like I had a really great class, especially like I'm about to go on vacation with some of like the some of my best friends from my grade, and it's like we had like a really strong group of Black girls
Mm.
that bonded, and all of us had like come at different times. Like there were some of us had been there since like fourth or sixth grade. I came in eighth grade,
Mm.
but I think we really like contributed to like the culture of the class. So yeah, I just think about like how many resources I had at that school, and how many resources were available, and how like really different it was than the different experiences I'd had before then. Like I had such a great time, and I know there were other people who didn't have a great time, but I had such a great time at that school. And it was almost like, you know, I was in another world, you know.
Mm.
And so yeah, I just think like that, like I don't know, I'm still thinking through like how I think about that experience in terms of what I do now, because I do believe really strongly in public education. And I remember a few years ago, I went back for like a Sacred Heart reunion, and they were like they found out I was teaching. They were like, "You should come back and teach here." And I was like, um, yeah, no, like if I really like cherish the experience I have. So I don't think I'm at the point where I don't think that kind of school should exist.
What you're talking about is real, because it's like there's a conundrum where it's like I benefited from these opportunities in this white school, but now I'm teaching the South Bronx, and like, do I really want to give money to this institution? And it's like, it did help me, but so I don't know. So that is complicated. And what was it like being in a predominantly white and rich school?
It was definitely a bit of a culture shock. Like, I don't think at the time, like, the whiteness, like, I think I knew white people. I'm trying to really remember. I don't know if I think there were white people around, like, especially at I went to this one parochial Catholic school from second to fifth grade, and there were white people there. There were white people in my neighborhood-ish, but this was like different, like in a different type of white, like, so it was definitely a culture shock. I feel like there were things that I realized, like I said differently, that I said differently than, obviously I wouldn't have realized it because I didn't say it differently to the people that I grew up with. But then like going to the school, people would be like point out things that I said here and there. And it was also just like it's like the school is really beautiful. Like it's like on these grounds and you drive up a long lawn and then you like, there's this like almost like a mansion, and then there are, other buildings that are built. There's like, like tennis courts and, an Olympic sized pool. I don't know if that's true, but a big pool. And I really feel really lucky for like, I was friends with everyone, but I definitely, like some of the friendships that I feel like the Black girls that we found each other a lot. And then I also just like had such great experiences, but there was definitely a lot of culture shock. Like the first sleepover I had, like I just remember this, I don't even know why she invited me to her house, because she was really nice. And so she invited me to her house, and I remember going from my apartment in Club City to like this like mansion, and they had an elevator in their house. Like that was the thing that I remember telling people about that for a minute. I was like, this house has an elevator in it. My friends, her bedroom, it was bigger than I feel like my whole apartment. Like it was definitely like a little bit of like, okay, this is real. Like she had horses, and like we went to the stables and like she rode horses, and it was just like a very wild experience. But it's something like that. I don't know. I think I must have gotten used to an extent by the time I was like towards the end of high school, So I didn't really expose me to a lot. But it's weird. It's not something that I want for myself. I don't want to live like that. I don't know if I would want to send my kids to a school like that. And I don't think I necessarily have to decide that now, Yeah, like Peter and I've had educational debates. But I really do think now I'm kind of like just reassessing like the ideas that we have related to education, and like so much of the like elitism that's in it, and so much of like, I was talking about this last night, like the reinforcement of like capitalism through education. Like I think it's really dangerous, and like a lot of times we just kind of accept it, like because it's so near and dear, people are like, I have to do the best for my kids, but yeah, I'm really trying to question that right now. But then I also had such a great experience there. Like I had so much fun. I really feel like I came into myself there. Like I had such a good time. I was just like running around like a little wild child, but I learned so much. There were great teachers. I really learned to like think for myself. I mean, I was already thinking for myself, but I think I really started to like build my worldview there. And who knows what it would have been like if I was somewhere else. Like I just can't say yet. But I really, really have a lot of like, I just had such a great time there that it's hard for me to just be like, that's not it, But yeah, my younger sister went there. She didn't have a great experience. One of my former roommates and good friends, she went there. Like she felt like, especially as as Black people, it's like, I think it can be really hit or miss. So I don't know, I had a lot of fun.
So in K through 12 education, there's a lot of talk about place-based learning. tell us about how you in Community Works Institute, we do a lot about ethnography and storytelling and personal student stories being told and connected with the curriculum. So when I visited you and your partner, Peter, we were doing our own little place-based exploration, or at least I guess for me as a tourist of Harlem, and you were showing me like the Sojourner, no, not Sojourner Truth. We saw the Frederick Douglass statue, and then we saw the Harriet Tubman statue, and we saw like the Apollo, and we saw Stryber's Row. We went to our friend's house there. So that's, and you and your partner were telling me all these different, like, oh, this is where this happened, and this is, you know, now there's like gentrification happening, and they're calling it like Soha, like Southern, you know, or South Harlem, and
Yeah.
this encroaching of money, and we're talking about capitalism and displacement of people. So how do you bring some of these ethnography, and you did anthro in as your major in college, how do you bring some of this stuff into your classroom in terms of getting the stories not out of students but into the curriculum and of the South Bronx?
Yeah. I think that's something we're constantly working towards. So I did study anthro and like sociology as a minor, and I feel like that has really influenced like the way I see things. I'm very much like, it really depends. That's a lot of how I think about a lot of situations. But I do like that for teaching, because I love that I can really see like where students are coming from, the way that they respond to like almost anything. There are times when I'm like, what are you talking about? But otherwise, most of the time I'm like, yeah, I can see that. I can see that. It's like this. So most of the time, I really love that about social sciences. Like, you really can, I mean, there are wrong things, but a lot of times there are lots of rights too, you know?
Yeah.
And so I love that about teaching. And I think that one of the things that we've been trying to do as a history department, I think I mentioned this book to you, but we read as a history department this book called Cultivating Genius by Guldi Muhammad. And she like has this framework for like how to plan in a way that really like uses like Black excellence from like the past, like Black literacy societies that a lot of us hadn't even heard of. And she was like, you know, there are things that Black people have been doing in education for a long time. Like, we need to like kind of draw from this well of knowledge. And so part of her framework is, I hope I get them all, there's identity. So that's what I was thinking about, like making sure that every like unit that you create, as many like learning experiences that you create, like students have a chance to like infuse their identity and see themselves. One of my coworkers is really great at that. I feel like I'm pretty good at that, but it's helpful to like actually like, as we're planning towards the end of the school year, like make sure that there is a space where we're actually thinking about like, how does this connect to students' identities? Like, how do we give students an opportunity to like put themselves in and see themselves in what we're talking about? So there's identity, there's criticality, which is about seeing like how equity, power, and oppression function in whatever unit you're talking about. There is skills and something else that I'm forgetting, but then we added this fifth one because she revised it and added joy. And so that's one of the big conversations we've been having as a department, like, how do we make infuse some joy? And I know a lot of people are talking about this more now. Fourth one, sorry, that's gonna bug me.
No, check it out. Yeah, joy is missing a lot from these conversations. And I noticed that in my own teaching style. But you did something interesting earlier in the conversation, which I think is important, where you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna be like silly right now. Now I gotta be serious. And I think we forget to do the silly stuff. At least I know in the college level, we forget, like, it's like, no, it's all about, like, you know, hyper, whatever, left brain or whatever it is. How do you incorporate joy, silliness, happiness, and play in your classroom?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I am very silly. I think that it's really important. Like, one of the stories I like to tell Peter is like when I was doing the residency, we did these mock interviews at the end of the year. And so like people from the residency were like, you know, interviewing as if you were like meeting with an outside principal. And I remember one of the questions they asked me was like, they asked me about what I want, like what was really important to me or what I wanted to do or why I wanted to work at a place. And I was like, I just want to have fun. Like, and the person who was interviewing me was like, you know, that is great. Like, they were like, that is great. I'm happy for you. Like, they were like, but you really shouldn't say that to someone who is thinking of hiring you. And I was like, okay, yeah, no. But I always remember that because I really do just like I want to have fun, and I don't think that you can have fun all the time. But I feel like my mission right now, especially like you know where we are as a world,
Yeah.
like, I just want students to have fun. Like I want them to have fun. I want to be having fun. Like it feels so much better when that's where it is, and like if they enjoy it, like some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, it's not fun stuff. It's not going to be like yeah. Okay, and I'm not even going to give an example because I don't want to do that. But you know, it's not always going to be fun, but like having an experience where you either are like having fun or finding what you're doing to be important. Like, I feel like it's really at the point where I'm like, what would make this matter to students? What would make it feel like you're not doing this because you have to be here, but because you want to be here? Like that would be next level.
Yeah, that's when you have students going to school just because they want to be engaged and have fun or learn about the material, then that's magic. And also then going back to something that you said about capitalism is like antithetical almost to fun, right? Unless it's commodified, and it's like unless you could put it on the shelf and you buy it and you like, you know, whatever, buy entertainment, you're not supposed to say have fun in an interview. Like you shouldn't, we're not gonna, that's not a serious person. We're not gonna hire you to have fun and bring out joy in our students. Like, no, that's it's like what? Like what we're supposed to be doing here, like making education and learning about the world more interesting and I don't know. I mean, so much of what we see in Hollywood now is edutainment, right? Is mixing education and entertainment. And it broke my heart to see Hassan Minhaj, the Patriot Act, like that show get taken off because he does these like fun kind of like TED Talks. But anyway, so, okay, we were gonna talk about Antiguan Roots. So what was it like growing up in your household, and how, like, does that help you connect with some of your students? Does it not help? I mean, does it inform some of your teaching? Speak on that.
I don't think we have enough time for this, but I think, I mean, like many immigrant families, my family was very focused on education and like really put a premium on it. And I think that I definitely wanted to like probably impress my parents for a minute. And then I don't know, I think there was probably a point that it became more about like me and what I wanted. But yeah, I think I will only speak for myself because I think my sisters had a different experience. And that is very much like a thing. But I do feel like my parents didn't put too much of an emphasis on grades, but I was getting good grades. So I don't know what it would be like. They were like my mom would be like, oh my goodness, like you got a 97 or whatever. And I have friends who said that like you know, that whole like, you got a 98, like where are the 2 points? Like, I'm like, that is wild. I'm like, that is actually wildness. Nobody ever said that to me. So yeah, I think they were proud of how I was doing, what I was doing, and they kind of were like, you seem like you got it, so like, go ahead and get it. Yeah, I think so. There was a point where I feel like I got like, I could get really intense, and like I was like up studying late, and my mom was like, you need to like chill, like relax a little bit. So for me, with my students, um, I don't have a ton of Caribbean students. I'm always looking for like Caribbeans. I'm like, are you? But I do feel like I'm so proud to be from the Bronx and teach in the Bronx. And like, even though like growing up, I know my experience growing up is really different than most of my students. I still feel like I can relate to them in some ways. Like sometimes I'm just like, yeah, like as people of color, like, you know, we know like X, Y, or Z, like, so I'm always like, I love whenever there's an opportunity for that. And I do feel like there are so many of like the Black girls throughout my time teaching that I've been able to have like really cool relationships with. But yeah, I just feel like all of my students, like you just learn so many things from people. Like they're just like so many dope people in the world. So it's been really cool to like to be a teacher, honestly. It's been pretty cool. Now I'm at the point where I'm just like, all this stuff that we were talking about, I feel like I just probably need to like listen to students more, and then that will like continue to make the classroom that we all want to happen.
Well, in tech, this whole thing called user-based design, right? Where it's like they make it super easy with the iPhone because they talk to all, you know, the customers and what they want to see. But it's weird how in education, both K through 12 and college level, we don't talk to the student and like, what do you want? And like, what do you think is important? And like, we'll add some of this old stuff, but we'll also put in some of the
Right. And it's wild because like sometimes you ask the kids that, and I feel like they're so used to like, they're like, no, it's fine. Sometimes they're like so sweet with it too. They're like, you're doing such a great job. Just keep on doing what you're doing. I'm like, thank you so much. But also,
yeah. Look, I don't want to take up your whole day, so I'll wrap up here. But what's some advice that you would give to maybe, you know, newer teachers, middle teachers, and older teachers, like, and you don't have to do all those, but like, is there certain advice that you would give folks from what you have seen?
not a big advice giver. But I would say, I mean, based on this last year, I think especially in a school like mine, like we were a pretty like quote unquote high performing school. And I think with teaching, there's so many expectations, like you feel like you have to do so many things. So based on who the person is, especially, you know, if you have like, you just feel like you can't do everything, I would say like try to do less. Like there's just, people are just really like working on themselves past the bone. Like it's a lot. And in this past year, I really like I had been wondering since I started teaching, like, is this a sustainable career? Like, is this something that I'm always gonna have to like do so much work outside of the classroom? And in the past year, like I really like was like, no, like I don't know. I feel lucky because I've been teaching long enough that I feel like that's really part of what makes that possible. But I just really have set up some, like I do my work when I'm at school, and then like I do other things outside of that. Like I don't feel like I need to like, I feel like I've put a lot of that teaching guilt in check. So like, I think that that's really important. For beginning teachers, I'm just like, shouts out to y'all. I don't even understand. Like, people have gone through it this year. People have been through it.
Yeah.
Like, we went out to happy hour after the last day of school on Friday, and there were 2 new teachers, and folks were just like, kudos, because it's not, I just can't imagine.
That's a lot. Yeah. Yeah. I had to do online stuff. And I mean, this is college students, but it's like, part of it was cool because you could like bring up your video super quick. You could bring up YouTube. You could bring up this song. You could check this out. Check out this art piece. But you could tell some people had their screens off. Some people were checked out. Like an hour into it, you're like, people still interested in that? Am I still interested?
Are we all still here? Where are we? What's going on? Why did we do this? Did we have to do this? Why did we do this like this? Are we sure? Yeah.
As a famous president said, is our children learning? Yeah, there's a lot that higher ed needs to do to change, that K through 12 needs to do to change. But I'm happy that you and I are teaching. I think we just need to not be get burnt out by all that's going on in the world. We didn't even get to talk about quote unquote racial reckoning and just
yeah, that's a whole nother.
Like waking up to like, oh my gosh, like this stuff's real. And it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, the last thing I will say though is like, I know we talked about critical race theory last time, and I was like, oh, like I had seen an interview where Mark Lamont Hill had said like critical race theory is like specific to like higher ed and like to law stuff. And I was like, okay, that's like, it does seem like it's getting overused. But then I've heard people talking about like, it's kind of, it is elitist to think that it is exclusive to that. Like everyone can use theory, like K through 12 teachers use theory when they like think about the way that race is embedded in institutions. And so like that really made me like rethink that. So I'm enjoying this point where like, I feel like it's just like a moment of just like questioning everything, but also like getting some space to like not have to implement it through a lesson plan.
Right. Well, the Time magazine came out with a new thing, and critical race theory is what Mark Lamont Hill was saying, but critical race theory for a lot of conservative folks is being used as, we don't want racial equity work being done in K through 12 because we think it, one, teaches kids to hate America, and 2, teaches white kids to feel guilty.
Yeah.
And so, and so then it's almost used as a tactic to like win back the suburbs. And it's unfortunate that now that we're finally talking about 1619, we're finally like trying to change the curriculum to have more indigenous, like BIPOC issues. There's always the white lash, right? That's the history of America, is just the continual white lash. So this is just the newest iteration. And I think the thing that really is now breaking my heart even more is that we're getting a glimpse into the future politics of America, where it's not certain dominant white groups versus folks of color, but now that there are like more light-skinned Latinx folks that are coming up and all this stuff, that now it's more complicated in terms of race, of who's hating on who and who's being the oppressor, and it's really scary. And so the future of American politics is not just going to be like, yeah, all folks of color are going to like vote progressive. It's like, no. It's going to be much more complicated than that.
Of course, yeah, it really is.
So anyway, I should let you go. This was beautiful. Thank you, Nedjra, for coming on the show and spitting some truth. Name it, don't say it.
Thank you, Zach. This is so fun. I was like, I didn't know what to expect. This is not cute.
Very cute. This is great. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Sorry we had some technical difficulties. Please come back to the Spotlight series on Fridays and Sundays. I'm Zack Ritter. Thank you, Joe Brooks, for letting us utilize the space of Community Works Institute. Please check out communityworksinstitute.org, where you can find professional development opportunities for K through 20 educators. And as always, keep the faith. Have a good one, everybody.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.